I understood that this narrative, this mythology, this propaganda of Russia being the brothers of Ukrainians and vice versa was just patently false. The Ukrainians have been independent only since 1991. The world, really since 2022, has just begun to see Ukraine as a full soul, as a full body, and not the rib of Russia.
So you're living in Ukraine or just going back and forth for many, many years. So what is your background, just for people to understand who Terrell is?
I am an independent journalist. I've been based in Ukraine consistently since 2022, but I first came to Ukraine in 2028. Eventually did a Fulbright grant here from 2009 to 2010, where I was here for a year and a half. So I'm a journalist who loves using the tools of reporting to help make us more interconnected with one another, you know? And I focus on the intersection of U.S. politics and race in Ukraine, because I like using my experience as a Black person here and relating what it's like to really question and fight and interrogate white supremacy, just like Ukrainians are interrogating and fighting against Russian supremacist colonial rule in their country. And I came to Ukraine, just the abridged version of it. First, I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Georgia. I was in Georgia. The funny story is that I thought that I was going to a country of white people. And then when I went there and started living there, and they were telling me about how they were abused by Russia and that they were dealing with skinheads every day when they would try to work, and that people wouldn't rent to them. If they were taxi drivers, they would be pulled over. That reminded me of the Black experience. And I'm like, oh, I thought that all y'all white people get along. And so it made me question what my thoughts about whiteness were. And so over the past 20 years, I've been living in the Caucasus, Central Asia, and now full-time in Ukraine, really exploring that subject, because I think that there's so many links between Ukraine and the Black American experience that can help not only advance conversations about foreign policy and how U.S. politics engage Ukraine, but it helps us to be better human beings to one another. And that's what my journalism is about. I live here full-time, and that's what my work does.
Terrell, you're originally from Detroit, and as far as I understood, Eastern European countries was your subject in the university. Yeah,
so it was so I began focusing on Eastern European politics when I was in graduate school, when I was about 26 years old. So before that, I knew nothing about it. Ironically, the first country I came to that was a part of the USSR was Russia. And this is when I was 20 years old. So this was 2001. I didn't know anything about Russia back then. I didn't have a family member who was a diplomat or anything. It was just a random opportunity for me to volunteer in a Russian orphanage and for a summer before my fourth year of getting my bachelor's degree. And so from there, I applied for Peace Corps. I was supposed to go to Russia in August of 2002. However, the program closed because Russia accused the Peace Corps of sending spies there. But that was a blessing in the skies, right? Because after that, I was reassigned to the country of Georgia, Sarkartvelo. And that's when I really gained an appreciation of Russian colonialism by talking to Georgians and Caucasus people about what oppression meant for them. Because as a Black dude that grew up in Detroit, which is the largest Black city in the United States, I understood what oppression meant for me as a Black man in America. I know my family's lineage. I know Jim Crow. I know Jim Crow racism and how it affects Black people. But I never thought that somebody who looked white or could pass as white in America could experience a similar type of oppression or oppression of their own. And so when I went to Georgia, that's what really drew my interest to explore more. And I did that by applying for a degree called, again, Russian, East European, and Eurasian Studies. A lot of these programs have been renamed to take out Russia. But in graduate school is when I really, really gained an advanced knowledge, like an academic knowledge of this.
Yeah, I was listening your interview to Phil Ittner 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And Well, when you are comparing African American experience in the United States with the Ukrainian experience of Russian colonialism, do American audience or Western audience, Americans predominantly, understand what you mean by that?
No, not at all, because America is, we have a way through which we understand people's experiences based on how they look. So if you look white, you are white, and you have the privileges of being white. People like to say that this is purely an American lens. That's just patently false, because anti-blackness and anti-anything is a global issue. It's not just America. It's just particularly prevalent there because of our demographics. But no, people don't understand that at all. And so when the big war started in February of 2022, that was my opportunity to explain why these similarities exist. And one of the ways that I helped Americans understand it is by comparing the Black Lives Matter movement to Maidan, because what those two movements have in common are police violence, because the state here killed Ukrainians. That was a police response.
Yes.
Yeah. And then in America, we have that experience with police violence as well. And so that is a prime opportunity, a nexus, sort of, if you will, to have a conversation about how we both as people deal with these supremacist structures that use law enforcement to oppress dissent, and how we can come together and build better relationships with one another. Because people, maybe we could say it's unfortunate that when painful things happen, that's when people begin to reflect and maybe reconsider who our friends are and who we should be building relationships with.
Russia was calling us brothers. Until the moment we were not obeying to Moscow, but they like to call someone brothers until they obey at some extent.
Mm-hmm.
Was you surprised on February 24th, 2022, that Russia attacked? The full invasion begun?
Absolutely not, because I've devoted so many years to understanding Ukrainian culture that I understood that this narrative, this mythology, this propaganda of Russia being the brothers of Ukrainians and vice versa was just patently false. I like to refer to American journalism, the genesis of it, as the white man's diary, the founding of it. I think that we've been given the Russian perspective about Ukraine, and not Ukraine giving us a perspective about who they are. And it took really the beginning phase, the first invasion, for America to look at Ukraine as an individual country. And quite frankly, America, even our political establishment, was not ready to do that. Because at the end of the day, America's a hegemon, Russia is a hegemon, and they believe that they have their spheres of influences and they have their tiers. And for America, Ukraine was under it. It was never viewed as an equal party or an equal participant in its own liberation, in its own foreign policy. Everything had to be triangulated through Moscow in order to seek, in order for Ukrainians to be respected. But that is the story of supremacist structures, supremacist people, white supremacy, Russian supremacy in general. It never honors the individuality of the parties, of the countries that they oppress. It has to be fought for. So when I bring up Maidan, I think the reason why Maidan and comparing Black Lives Matter is just so powerful is because you get respect by demanding it. A prime example of this is how editors at the Associated Press, for example, refused to spell Kyiv properly with the Ukrainian iteration of it. It was the Russian iteration. The reason why it changed is because Ukrainians went on Twitter when Twitter was a legitimate platform, okay, and said, no, this is who we are. You Westerner in New York and Washington, D.C., do not get to dictate to us how you spell the capital city of our country. They were forced to do this. This wasn't some awakening by, the editors of these premier institutions. And I think black people have this same experience. And the reason why I became a national correspondent and so many other black people became news correspondents, political correspondents, is because the Black Lives Matter movement demanded that for all the deaths that are taking place in America, we have too many white reporters that come into our communities that don't understand our perspective. They go on national television as commentators talking about race, but the people who are most affected by it aren't present. And so I have to thank the Black Lives Matter movement for that. Just like you, as Ukrainians, fought for your own liberation, it was protest and it was defiance that challenged the West to do better.
You mentioned Maidan, and you were openly saying not only once about racism in Ukraine before that moment. What have changed in your life after? Positively, negatively, do you see the effect of something in the society, in your private life?
Yes, absolutely. So when I first came to Ukraine in 2009, I hired two real estate agents to help me to find a flat in Ukraine. And when I first came down, when I first flew to Ukraine, got off the plane, I met my real estate agents because I wanted to get a flat the day I flew in. I sent my money. I said, I'm going to pay 6 months in advance. The real estate agent said, hello, my name is Igor. Your skin color is causing us a lot of problems. So that was his first words to me. And so I'm like, why? And he said, you'll see. It was him and a Nigerian brother. They took me around. I had all my luggage for a year and a half of being in Ukraine. And each flight I went to, the Haziaika said, no, we don't rent to black people. They said that verbally. We do not rent to black people. And what was really funny about it was they said, the real estate agent said, well, this guy is an American. They tried to do everything they could to hide the fact that I'm black, and so the Haziaika, the landlords would say, is he black? And they would say, yeah. And they said, well, I'm not interested. So it took me the 10th landlord to say, we don't have a problem with them. And so that was my first introduction to Ukraine. And then on top of that, I also was stopped by police because they were racially profiling then. And so there were times when I was stopped 3 times in a day. And I stopped counting the number of times I was stopped by police at 30. I was stopped probably 50, 60 times. I just stopped counting at 30. And the moment that really broke the camel's back, if you will, was I was at the Centralny Vokzal on my way to my Russian language class. And we could talk about why I was learning Russian back then as opposed to Ukrainian. But I was stopped by some young cop that looked like he was maybe fresh out of the academy, 18, 19 years old. He stops me at the window because back then you couldn't pay to get on the train with your phones. We had those blue tokens. And so I go into the back where I guess there's like a little holding cell. Key thing, I was taught by the Nigerian diaspora here, who's been here for decades, that if a Ukrainian cop stops you, never speak to them in English, only speak to them, never speak to them in Russian, only speak to them in English. And so I asked the cop in English what's wrong. In Russian, he said, you're a and we know that you're bringing drugs into our country. So show us your drugs right now. They held me for 30 minutes. Just the whole thing, right? Funny story, I'm going to put a point on it, is after about 30 minutes, I got frustrated. And the cop looks at me and says, so you've been here for 4 months, right? And then in Russian, I'm like, yeah, yes. And then he says, so you mean to tell me you've been here for 4 months, you've been learning the Russian language, you don't understand a word I'm saying? Yet. So my point is that now I don't deal with that anymore as much better. However, I have to also note that I'm a Black American. So to add on to that story, I went to the embassy because I was here under a U.S. Fulbright grant, which was supervised by the U.S. Department of State in the embassy here in Kyiv, where I was the first person that they gave this blue employee card to that was written in Ukrainian and Russian. But I think things are are much better now, but I have to also acknowledge that because I'm a Black American, I don't have the same experience as somebody that comes from the continent of Africa because I have a vastly different experience. Moreover, I have an embassy that local police respect. People don't really want to mess with Americans. So that's a little bit of passport privilege that I have to acknowledge. So if you ask an African what their perspective is here, or a Black Ukrainian, for example, they may give you a vastly different experience or a perspective because I know my Black Ukrainian friends, many of them left Ukraine because they felt like they would not be able to raise a child here. I know Africans who have issues with paperwork, the whole 9 yards, and I don't have those problems. I'm very cognizant that racism is a global issue, so it's not just Ukraine.
You know, Terrell, I'm not surprised, I'm not blind, and I'm not surprised that people were treating you this way. I was raised in this society, so I will not act like, oh, I'm in shock. Well, I'm not. It will be, you know, it's not true.
Yeah.
But I'm not surprised even that the police were asking for drugs and people were didn't want you to let you to live in their apartments, even for money. But you know what I'm surprised, Terrell? You're still choosing Ukraine to stay in. Why?
Anti-Blackness is everywhere. If I had to worry about racism or go to a country where racism doesn't exist, I need to get on my knees and ask God to bring me home early. I have several perspectives, one of which is that, generally speaking, my life here is fine. I love it here. I don't have problems. In fact, I'm planning to go to Odessa in the next couple of weeks. I plan on going to Kharkiv. I have a whole bunch of people saying, Terrell, I got a house here. You can stay here. I got a flat here. If you want to come to my city, you can stay. You ain't got to get an Airbnb. So my life is great. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that I really try to integrate. The only thing that the last point that I need to do to really fully integrate is to learn Ukrainian language. And I'm working on that. But I can't say anything but positive things about Ukraine because it's been very good to me. And the reason why I spend more time here than I do in New York is that my friendships here, I feel like I have a fuller experience. We were talking earlier about you being in New York and everybody just trying to keep up in the rat race. That doesn't exist here. When people say, I want to go out for beers, I want to go out to do this, that, and the third, they mean it. They don't mean it just to say as a pleasantry. No, when people in Ukraine say, let's go out for tea or let's do this, they expect a follow through on it. And so my general life is fine. But when it comes to race, my country, the United States of America, unless you've been living under a rock, America has used its law enforcement bodies to discriminate against people on the basis of race. Our police departments kill Black people and people of color at higher rates than arguably any other police force in the world. Okay, my country elected a racist, a fascist, a sexist, a dozen times accused sexual assaulter. So when you ask me about, Ukraine has all these race issues and why am I still here? Because when I go back home, it's just a different set of problems dealing with racism. So this is not Wakanda, okay? There's no Wakanda on planet Earth. So what I do is I have the intellectual and emotional bandwidth to make things better. I feel like it's a calling for me because I'm a believer. I believe in God. And in fact, anytime I go back home, I go to my local church and my pastor and I talk about the very same question you asked me, like, why am I here? And I'm constantly reinforced with the fact that this is something spiritually that I believe that I'm here to do to help better connect people. And I'm educated enough and emotionally mature enough to do the work academically and also as a journalist to lead conversations so that I can, when I leave this earth, I can say that I did something that can help Ukrainians and my fellow Americans better understand each other better, particularly through the lens of race, where it's one of the most contentious issues in our world right now.
That sounds like a mission.
It is, because journalism to me, it's about tools. So I went to graduate school. I have a master's degree in news editorial journalism from the University of Illinois. So, and my first job was covering city council. And before the internet became a thing, I was working at, NPR, National Public Radio, a local affiliate. It's called Illinois Public Radio right now, which is on the campus of my, University of Illinois, covering City Hall. And so I learned the tools of journalism, but what I learned about myself is that, particularly being here in Ukraine, they don't want me to be that reporter at the Wall Street Journal. They don't want me to be that reporter at CNN or the New York Times or the Washington Post. They really like my passion of being voicey and using the tools of journalism that I've acquired over the years to help better connect them on an emotional level to people. And so when you talk about the mission, my mission is, when I came here, I looked at Ukrainians, I looked at Georgians, people who were colonized by Russia, because I look at places like Ukraine, they're not republics, I consider them colonies, There are a bunch of white people who don't require nuance, right? I was wrong. And because I'm so open in acknowledging that I'm wrong, I want to use the tools of journalism, the ability to investigate, to interview people, to practice what it means to grow.
When you are comparing those Black American stories with the Ukrainians, do you see that Ukraine now in charge and responsible of its own story and destiny?
So when I do these comparisons about Black people and Ukrainians, and this larger question of, are Ukrainians like taking the helm of really sharing their own story and their own perspective to the rest of the world, they're trying. There are several problems with this. The Ukrainians have been independent only since 1991, and the world, really since 2022, has just begun to see Ukraine as a full soul, as a full body, and not the rib of Russia.
Wow.
So it's always been a rib of Russia, even before 2022. And I think, again, it came with Ukrainian blood. People tend to get attention. They tend to force people to think about their humanity when someone dies. So take for example, when George Floyd was killed in Minnesota on camera, and then you had all this outpouring of outrage across the world. Yes. It took this man being killed for 10 minutes for the world to say, wow, this is bad. It wasn't Black people saying before this that this is an issue, that we need to come together, that we need to right the wrongs of our legal system that allow this to continue. Ukraine has a similar story. 2022 was not the beginning of Russia raping and pillaging and colonizing and erasing, or attempting to erase Ukrainian culture and society. What it took was for children to be on buses with their moms, and millions of people at the border fleeing from their homes that have been ravaged and destroyed, for them to care. And so what we as people share is that we are always considered that second tier, right? We're that second tier of people who is fighting to be considered first tier. And there's even problems with the way that we, saying that there's a second tier, a third tier, and a fourth tier. But that's the way that white supremacy and supremacist structures work. It puts people at levels of, why should I give a damn? And when Ukrainians fought back, it wasn't an opportunity for Europe to finally say, oh, we're going to go gung-ho and support Ukraine. Quite frankly, it was an inconvenience. I truly believe that one of the major issues behind why Europe is so reluctant to go after Russia and really go hard on them, there are several reasons, but one of them is no one thought that Ukraine was as advanced a society culturally as it is, because the top leaders, the top foreign policy people were not paying attention because you were not worthy of being paid attention to. That is the truth. That is the truth. And so I think with Ukrainians, the new challenge now is you're fighting against a multi-billion-dollar propaganda machine with Russia Today or RT, whatever the hell they call it now. And they put up the narrative that we are the anti-colonial power in the world. We are against the West. Now, never mind the fact that what we know as Russia today is a result of hundreds of years of colonialism where they have mass murdered indigenous people. They are the OGs of racism and hatred and colonialism that rivals Europe. The difference is that there is more internal and localized, whereas the Europeans cross oceans, et cetera, to seek conquest. And the Russians have been very good with spreading their propaganda across Africa. Meanwhile, Russians don't give a damn about Africa. They actually tried to colonize the continent of Africa. The only reason was because the Europeans won and did it better and pushed them away from that conquest effort. But Russians tried to colonize Africa, particularly Ethiopia. There are a number of countries that they tried to colonize and on the continent. And so a lot of people on the continent think that because of very real issues of Europe colonizing them, Europe stealing and extracting their natural resources, Europe using these international bodies in order to keep them in debt, right? They have legitimate grievances that Russia exploits. And this is a larger problem with why certain people in the West tend to have these sympathies towards Russia without recognizing that, yes, the West is imperial, but so is Russia. They're no better. And the Ukrainians, I think, have a great opportunity to say that we don't have the same colonial history as the Europeans. Yes, we should be in the European Union. We want to be in NATO, but they have an opportunity to establish their own brand of what it means to be European. They can be the new modern European nation that's a model for all countries to follow that don't have that colonial past. However, in order for them to do that, they're going to have the intellectual dexterity to align themselves with and appreciate the grievances of African nations, of South America, so that they will not be viewed as people who are just absolutely dismissive of it. But I think that Ukraine is not doing the best job of it because so much of their engagement with the world has been through Europe and been through this white lens. And I think that does the Ukraine a disservice, but they have plenty of time to make up for that.
Yeah, we have a group of people that are working on a global south. I know it's not only Africa, it's much more than that. But still we're working on it because Russia did a very unfortunately good job there.
Superb.
Yeah.
And again, the biggest irony of it is that they kill so many ethnic minorities. I remember during the first days of the war, and this is a very personal story of mine, is that I was embedded with territorial defense forces for a couple of weeks. And the unit I was with ended up being disbanded. We were in Brovary, right? And we were disbanded because the unit was not designed to deal with airstrikes, and our checkpoint was, and I'm saying I wasn't a soldier, I was embedded with them, but I was there. But the checkpoint that we were at was hit by a MiG, and it killed a number of people. And so they disbanded it, and then we went, and then a soldier friend of mine that was in that unit, we converted to basically helping women, and particularly people who are ill, to leave Ukraine to go into the European Union. And one of my friends was forced to leave a hospital because she was dealing with cancer, but she wasn't critically injured. a lot of the people, yeah, it's a wild story. This woman was dealing with cancer. It's in remission now, thank God. But she was politely asked to leave the hospital to deal with people who are critically injured through the war. And a lot of these hospitals had people who were from the Caucasus, who are ethnic minorities. You could tell by looking at their last names, And so they send so many people here to die because they don't care about them. People whose populations are on the verge of extinction. And so when you say that Russia is the anti-imperial force, my question is, what do you say to all these ethnic minorities, the Crimean Tatars, who have been sent to the front lines to die at the risk of basically having their whole population erased? That's what colonialists do. And so constantly pushing that narrative is something that I do, but I find it so fascinating how people can get locked in on one particular narrative, but it works if you've been doing it for decades.
Russia has been for decades calling Ukraine a racist country or a Nazi country. And do people in the West still buy on this, considering the fact how Russians are treating Ukrainians, Caucasians, you're saying Central Asians?
No, I'll say a lot. There are several kind of groups of people who I think have certain levels of ignorance. I think the majority of people, if you give them the right information, if you speak to them properly, they'll get it, right? Yeah. So on the bright side of it, at the beginning of the war in particular, I spent a lot of time talking to Black media. And by the way, Black people, my argument is that Black people are more likely to support candidates that back Ukraine than any other ethnic group in the country. That's another conversation, but it's a very key group that even Ukrainians are not aware of. But because if it wasn't for Black people voting for Joe Biden, you wouldn't. Could you imagine Trump being at the helm?
That's a great
at that
point.
time.
That's
okay, but Black
point.
people at 90% voted for Joe Biden, and so basically, you have a situation where, when I talk to people and say, these are based on being an American, this is what our assumptions are about Ukrainians. Here's my perspective based on being there. Instantly, there is a change. I have a critique of the Biden administration. I say this because I was invited to a number of either events or invitations to speak with senior level people, who deal with Russia, who deal with Ukraine. They were not very good at messaging, even though they were excellent at legislating. They at communicating, right? And their communication on Ukraine. And I think and they got a lot of support in the nation, across America for Ukraine. It had nothing to do with communication. It had to do with people's own empathy and what they saw on media. And then, around April 2022, you saw that dip, right? And I think that dip happened because the Biden administration didn't understand the cultural dynamics of America and how you have one set of messaging for this group of people versus this group of people. And I was more than willing to volunteer my time to do that. And I'm not saying this because I think I do think that I'm top stuff, but, I'm just confident in my knowledge and my experience. But I just wish that the administration would have taken advantage of someone like me who lives here, who knows how to cover all these aspects of society from a strategic communication standpoint. So you have another group of people who tend to believe in propagandistic messaging. Particularly the kind of far left people, people who consider themselves to be progressive. And these are the types of people who have this kind of affinity for communism because they have a lot of legitimate concerns or grievances about capitalism. It's my view that any economic structure that is controlled by human beings is bound to be corrupted. I don't think there's any perfect system. If a human being is administering it, they can corrupt it. Going back to the point that we're discussing, dealing with, say, people who are Democratic Socialists of America, for example, their thing is look at what the West did in the Middle East. Because of that, we need to stop the, NATO, the military-industrial complex. And so they lack the, I think they lack the appreciation for the fact that, yes, these are structures that have made bad decisions, or these are governments that made bad decisions. However, the only way for Ukraine to really defend itself or to stop Russia from swallowing up its entire territory is that they need guns to do it. I've had conversations with people who are leftists, and the common thing they ask me is, Terrell, what about the working class Russian? What about the what about the people here? If we get all the workers together and they unite, and then we can reunite with the Western workers, and we could do it that way. They have this idea, this fantasy, that the people in Russia right now, the ones, if you go on any Telegram channel or any social media network, the working class Russians who, if they have the means, will go to Crimea and vacation in a Tatar's house, or they'll do some type of Russian version of Airbnb in Crimea or in Donetsk or in Luhansk, and vacation in a home that was formerly owned by a Ukrainian. These working class people, you think they are going to unite with you to take down the czar that they vote for? I think that these people who say that the polling in Russia does not properly reflect how Russians think, I don't believe it. I think it's BS. I think that these are people who don't want to accept that Russians and American white people are kind of similar. I think the person who votes for Trump and the person who votes for Putin or who likes Putin, they're in a group chat together.
Unfortunately, we are running out of time. But to be honest, I'm really glad that I invited you to hear your perspective as a Black American person living in Ukraine for so many years and spreading the information you are spreading. And of course, you're a very emotional journalist, which I like very much. And I think it deserves a lot of trust from your audience.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming. I think it's not the last time us talking to each other. Thank you.